Welcome back to Chapter 13, Key Issue 3. Why are urban areas expanded? You can see there's quite a bit here. Number 1, state 3 definitions of urban settlements. Number 2, describe how metropolitan areas contain many local governments and overlap with each other. Number 3, identify historical and contemporary patterns of suburban expansion. Number 4, explain 2 ways in which suburbs are segregated. Number 5, describe the impact of motor vehicles in urban areas. Number 6, describe recent and possible future improvement to vehicles. And number 7, state benefits and limitations of public transportation. We have peripheral model, edge cities, urban area, urbanized area, urban cluster, metropolitan statistical area, micropolitan statistical area, core-based statistical area, primary census statistical area, overlapping metropolitan areas, megalopolis, council of government, annexation, density gradient, sprawl, greenbelts, smart growth, residential segregation, and rush hour. Okay, so several definitions have been created to characterize cities and their suburbs. The term city defines an urban settlement that has legally incorporated into an independent self-governing unit. Okay, in the U.S., these urban settlements are sometimes known as central cities. Okay, so how do you know if Shakopee is a city? Well, there are vehicles around that have Shakopee written on them, such as police cars, fire trucks, public utilities like snowplows, etc. That means that it is an independent self-governing unit. They have their own government, right? The mayor of the city, who's Bill Mars, right? And the 5 city council members. So here you have different definitions of St. Louis. The area in red here shows the actual city of St. Louis. Then you have urban areas and then urban clusters. The area that is outlined in red is the core-based statistical area. The lighter is the micropolitan statistical area, and then this darkest color of peach is the metropolitan statistical area. So somebody who lives right here, if you asked if they were in California and said, hey, where are you from? They'd probably say St. Louis. But also with the person out here in Franklin County would probably say, I'm from St. Louis, because they're part of that metropolitan area. An urban area consists of a dense core of census tracts, densely settled suburbs, and low-density land that links the dense suburbs with the core. The census recognizes 2 types of urban areas. An urbanized area has at least 50,000 inhabitants. An urban cluster is an area between 2,500 and 50,000. The U.S. Bureau of Census has created a method of measuring the functional area of a city known as the MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. It includes an urbanized area with a population of at least 50,000 people, the county within the city is located, and adjacent counties with high population density, and a large percentage of residents working in the central city's county. Overlapping metropolitan areas. Some adjacent metropolitan statistical areas overlap so they now form one continuous urban complex. Okay? The Wabash, for example, extending north of Boston to south of Washington. This was sometimes referred to as a megalopolis, Greek word meaning great city. You can travel from Boston, Massachusetts, all the way to Washington, D.C., and you never really leave a metropolitan area. Most U.S. metropolitan areas have a council of government, which is a cooperating agency consisting of the various local governments. The purpose may be to do some overall planning for the area that cannot be performed by the single local government. Annexation. The process of legally adding land area to a city is annexation. Many U.S. cities have grown rapidly during the 19th century. They offered better services than available in the countryside like water, sewer, etc. Density gradient. U.S. tend to become less and less dense as one ventures farther from the city's center. This phenomenon is known as the density gradient. Here's examples of annexation in Chicago. The original city limits of Chicago in 1837 are pretty small here. On several occasions, the city limits of Chicago have grown. Suburbanization. In 1950, only 20% of Americans lived in suburbs. Today, over 50% of Americans live in suburbs. What are suburbs? They're the communities that surround the central city. We have 2 central cities where we live, Minneapolis and St. Paul. All of those cities around them are known as suburbs. This is sometimes referred to as suburban sprawl as the suburbs go further and further out from the central city. The flattening of the density gradient for a metropolitan area means that its people and services are spread out over a larger area. Sprawl is the progressive spread of development over the landscape. There are many costs associated with suburban sprawl. The roads and utilities must be extended, higher fuel consumption, loss of agricultural land, and local governments typically spend more on services for these new developments. So what are some solutions? Tax incentives, so that people reinvest in already urbanized areas. Increased developer fees. One extreme measure is the growth boundary of Portland, Oregon, we'll show you in a minute. And then also smart growth, was revitalizing already existing urban areas. This is the Portland growth boundary. Portland looked at their Pacific Northwest neighbor, Seattle, Washington, that exploded. Portland wanted to stay a medium-sized city, so they put this growth boundary around it. You cannot develop any new buildings, any new residences 50 miles outside of this growth boundary. Here in Portland, you can actually see the growth boundary. This is a new development, and this is a field. If this were the Twin Cities, in 10 years, this would look like this, right? But not in Portland. This growth boundary means you can't build new houses on that area. So instead of looking like this, it stays looking like this. A greenbelt is a ring of land maintained as parks, agriculture, or other types of open spaces to limit the sprawl of an urban area. It's sort of a makeshift growth boundary like in Portland. Smart growth is revitalizing already existing urban areas. So you take a street that looks like this and you make it look like this. You add mixed land use, so down here are shops, above them are the residences. And residences of all different sizes and income levels. Then you have a walkable areas, you can include green spaces, public transportation like buses and light rail, to make living in already urbanized areas more attractive. Suburban segregation. The modern residential suburb is segregated two ways. First, by social class. Going back to our sector model in urban patterns, we see similar price houses are typically built in close proximity to another, thus attracting specific range of income earners. Prime example of that would be this gated community named Bear Path in Eden Prairie. Everybody who lives in Bear Path is stinking rich. And then land uses, okay? The modern residential suburb is segregated by land uses. Residents are separated from commercial and manufacturing activities that are confined to compact, distinct areas. In the inner city, you might see a coffee shop right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. But in the suburbs, it's either all houses or all shops. Zoning ordinances enacted in the early 20th centuries contributed to the most notably the segregation of land use associated with suburbs. An edge city is a large node of businesses and consumer services within the suburbs. Bloomington might be a great example of an edge city. So would Eden Prairie. Motor vehicles. Cars and trucks permitted large-scale development of suburbs at a greater distance from the central city. Motor vehicles use a considerable amount of space in U.S. cities. The average city allocated about 1/4 of its land to roads and parking lots. Multi-lane freeways cut 75 wide paths through the heart of a city, and elaborate interchanges consume even more space. Valuable land in the central city is devoted to parking cars and trucks. Rush hour, you've all heard of that. 40% of trips in and out of the CBD occur during 4 hours of the day, 2 hours in the morning and 2 in the evening. The car of the future. Motor vehicles are one of the greatest challenges to reducing pollution in urban areas. So automakers are scrambling to bring alternative fuel vehicles to the market, like electric, diesel, hybrid, ethanol, plug-in hybrid, and hydrogen fuel cars. Many urban areas encourage public transportation. In larger cities, public transit is better suited than motor vehicles to move large numbers of people. They take up much less space. They're more cost-effective, they emit less pollution, and they're more energy efficient. Europe has a great deal of public transportation, but there are limits in the U.S. Most people in the U.S. overlook the benefits because they place higher value on privacy and flexibility offered by their cars. Most U.S. cities don't offer great public transportation. That's an awful lot, but we did finish up Chapter 13, Key Issue 3. I will see you back tomorrow for the very last key issue screencast for AP Human Geography.